A New York City cop is facing charges in federal court today in connection with a cannibalistic kidnapping
He had
plot.
a gun, a badge, and he was willing to kill.
And it's pictures of a naked woman roasting on a spit and another woman with her throat slit as sexual fantasies.
That's not who I really am. That's never, people who know me the best know that, and I'm ready to show people who I really am. That's it.
Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of NYC Crime Spot. Today I have a very special guest, Mr. Gilberto Valle. Is Valle the correct way to say it, Gil?
Typically in Spanish it is Valle, but I go with Valle.
Valle, okay.
Yeah.
So Gilberto Valle. He is the subject of the HBO documentary Thought Crimes, the Case of the Cannibal Cop. He's the author of the 2017 book Raw Deal, The Untold Story of NYPD's Cannibal Cop, a memoir. And he's written some other books. We have 2018, Gil, you came out with A Gathering of Evil. 2019, you did a sequel to that book, The Social Catalog of Prey. And then that same year, it looks like you also came out with this book, The Lake Tahoe 10 Killings. So you've fashioned yourself into quite the author. You have, what, about 4 books out at the moment.
Yeah, 4 books. There was always a question when the case was over and I was acquitted and out of prison. Like, okay, what the hell am I going to do with my life now? So,
right.
I had some writing skills that got the FBI to think that I was this international mastermind of cannibalism, and they thought it was a whole real thing. So I said, hey, let me try writing.
All right, yeah. So we'll get to that. Gilberto Valle is the defendant in one of the most extraordinary and interesting cases in United States history, United States of America versus Gilberto Valle, where you obtained the unfortunate moniker of the Cannibal Cop. But before we get to that, you're a Queens native, much like myself. You grew up in Queens. Can you tell us where you grew up in Queens, Gil, and what was that like growing up in New York City and Queens specifically?
Born and raised in Forest Hills. I went to a Catholic school, elementary school there. Very quiet neighborhood, had a lot of friends, played baseball up until through high school. Very typical American upbringing, other than my parents divorced when I was young, but it happened when I was young, so it didn't really impact me too much. It was just part of the routine, custody arrangements, 2 weeks with my dad, every other weekend with my mom. That happened very early on, so it was always part of my upbringing. It was normal. It was normal to me and my brother. That's really it. Just like nothing crazy with my childhood.
Okay, so your parents got divorced and you were at such an age where it wasn't like you were 10 or 15 years old where it kind of would have messed with you. It was something you always used to, basically.
Exactly. It happened when I was very young. So it's something that I grew into, and it was just part of life for me and my brother.
Yeah. So how was your school life? You had a lot of friends? You Mr. Popular or just kind of?
Yeah, pretty popular. Always had a lot of friends. I was in the crowd that was always involved in things, and like I said, I played baseball, so I made more friends.
Okay. Any dating luck? Did you have a lot of girlfriends, or was that kind of
casual hookup kind of things? I had a couple crushes. I didn't have the balls to ever ask them out, but I've never had any problems with relationships with females, even just as friends or just acquaintances.
Okay.
Yeah.
So high school, you end up in Archbishop Molloy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Which is a Catholic school, pretty good school, right?
Yeah, very, very good school.
Yeah. And when you're in high school, ultimately you go to the University of Maryland, right?
Yes.
What was your goal in high school? What did you want to go to college for? And tell us what you ultimately got a degree in.
Yeah, when I was a kid, of course, everyone has a dream, right? Like you want to be a shortstop at the New York Yankees. Yeah. So I went to Molloy. They had a very good baseball program. very good academically. So I went to Malloy for academics and baseball. I wanted to try and really be serious about baseball when I was growing up. We actually won the city championship my senior year, got to play at Shea Stadium.
Wow.
So that was very good. But as I started getting older, I started to realize maybe, you know, the long haul with baseball is just not going to work out ultimately. So around that age, I started getting interested in psychology, criminal justice, things like that. I took an AP class at Malloy, psychology, found it very interesting. So that's, well, that was my next plan. I saw Maryland, in addition to just a beautiful campus. I went there, just fell in love with the campus right away. They had very good psychology programs, criminal justice type things. So, you know, Maryland was it. I wanted to go away from home for college, but close enough where if I had to come home, it's not like I had to jump on a plane. I could just, you know, quick 3-4 hour train ride back to New York if I ever had to come home. But I was just, I was in Maryland all the time.
So you get a bachelor's degree in psychology, is that correct?
Psychology and criminal justice.
Psychology and criminal justice. Okay.
Yeah.
And what year do you get out of University of Maryland? When do you graduate?
Yeah, 2006.
2006. Okay. Okay. So when you get out, Gil, is it what are you aiming? What do you? I mean, ultimately, you become a cop. But what are you looking at? Did you debate becoming a psychologist? Did you want to get into maybe the forensic aspects of psychology? What was like your goal?
Yeah, there were a few, you know, just literally from freshman year, I'm like, okay, you know, I'll be more with psychology. Then I started taking some criminal justice classes. A lot of them overlap. That's why I was able to add criminal justice as a double major. A lot of those classes sort of overlapped. So as I got into more of the criminal justice stuff, I had some professors who were adjunct type gentlemen. They were captains, lieutenants in one of the police departments in Maryland. That's when I first started to really think about it. They made the job sound very interesting. The whole aspect of, you know, you go in and it's something different every day. You're never doing the same thing, right? So I started to look into the NYPD. I looked at the benefits. You know, you work 20 years, you retire. I started doing the math in my head. So, okay, if I go right into the academy, I'll be 42 when I retire, half pension, and then I can do something else. So it all was very appealing. My family wasn't thrilled about it. They thought I was too smart for something like that. But my plan was, look, I'll do my time. I'll be a patrol cop for a few years. I'll work my way up. I'll, you know, sergeant lieutenant. By the time I retire, I'll hopefully be, you know, a boss, someone of rank. So that was my plan. The academy was literally 2 or 3 months after I graduated from Maryland. So.
Oh, really? So 2006, you get in right into the academy.
Right in. I graduated in May. I was in the academy July 10th, I think it was. So yeah, I mean, I was very young. Went right in. Obviously, I was qualified. Everyone always has questions. Oh, like how did the psych department like pass this guy? Right? He was turned out to be this monster. But I never had any psychological issues or any. No tendencies, no violent tendencies, nothing like that.
Okay, so you end up way uptown in Manhattan. You know, like Harlem, Morningside Heights area.
Yes.
And that's the 24th precinct.
Started in the 32nd precinct. After 6 months, I did my time, what was called Operation Impact, where they would flood some of the more violent areas with rookies who just graduated from the academy, put them on foot posts. Basically, every single street corner had 2 cops and in those kinds of areas. So you do that for 6 months until the next academy class graduates and they replace you. You go on to your permanent assignment. And that was the 26th precinct where I got transferred after 6 months. Yeah.
Okay. What was life like being a cop over there? Did you ever second guess what you were doing, or you just liked it? You enjoyed it a lot?
I always enjoyed it. I was very serious about learning the law. I always wanted to know what I was talking about when I was interacting with people. I learned early on that it could be you could have very rough days, right? You could have very tough days seeing the kinds of violent things that I saw, you know, death and all kinds of stuff. But I learned early on, you know, you should really, once one job is over, you go to the next job. Like you don't take the previous job to the next one. You know, people are calling 911 because they're in a dire situation most of the time. I've gotten some strange calls, but
Yeah.
everyone deserved my best effort, and I was always very cognizant of that. I always wanted to be articulate with the law, what I was talking about. So I didn't have any problems. I enjoyed it. I was a good cop. Sergeants trusted me, and bosses trusted me. A lot of people just it was a good 6-7 years.
Yes, you're on for 7 years. Yeah. Do you think your psychology education helped you with maybe with compassion or maybe understanding people?
It certainly did. Yeah. You had the whole good cop, bad cop dynamic, right? It was popular in books and movies and things like that. And I partnered with a guy for we were together about 4 years, and he was the bad cop when things got, when we had to get a little tougher. He was the one who sort of took control when things had to be toned down and calmed down. I was the one who kind of took the lead. So we worked really well together. Definitely with the psychology aspect, understanding that people are in a dire situation.
Okay. Yeah. So around the time you become a cop, and at some point you meet a woman, and you do get married in you're 26 or 27 years old. You do get married, Gil?
Yes. Yeah. 20, 26.
26.
27, yeah.
27, you get married, and then you have a child also.
Yeah.
So you're a young guy. I mean, you're still a young guy, but you're a young guy, mid-20s, around that age. You have a kid, you're married, you're a cop. What is life like? Is that stressful? You kind of juggling all these things. You're a young guy, you're growing up fast.
Yeah, there were times with the job and being a young father with a baby and all that. There were things were very busy, but I did enjoy it. I was always very much like a man's supposed to work, right, provide for the family. I was making enough money where my wife was able to stay home from work, and her job was to raise a child. So we had a good situation. We moved to Forest Hills where I grew up. Nice neighborhood. Everything was great. I was really happy.
Good.
It hurts to think about those days, right? And what happened and where I am now, and just some days you just wish you can go back and handle things differently.
Yeah. So we'll get to that, Gil. So at some point you're getting home late from work. Your wife, let's say it's getting towards the late hours of the night. Your wife, maybe she's tired. She's putting the baby to sleep. She's going to sleep, and I don't know if it's that you're a little wired from the job. You still got a little energy in you. You're coming home late. You start going on to internet websites. Some of the sites that you start getting into, well, before we get to that, what was your initial? You're hanging out online all late hours of the night. What was the motivation behind that at first? Was it just you were looking at like porno sites, or just you were bored? What was really going on?
It was bored looking at porno sites. Late in my mid to late teen years, I was aroused sort of by the Bdsm types of things, right? Images, videos of women tied up, gagged. So that was kind of my thing. Eventually, I stumbled upon a more cannibalism website. It was called Mookie's Kitchen.
Mookie's Kitchen?
Mookie's Kitchen, yeah.
Mookie's Kitchen,
that was the first one I sort of found. And again, it's always very tough to talk about. It's embarrassing to talk about, but that was my kink. Like, I was aroused by these sorts of images where women like on a platter, tied up, and
and like I said, I know it's like I said, I'm not here to talk to you to make fun of all this, and I really appreciate you coming on, Gil.
Yeah, and since I've become sort of the face of these weird fetishes, I've been able to speak at certain events, and I've heard everything under the sun now. People message me on social media. They see me as this sort of white knight for people with unusual fetishes. So it's just it's unfortunate that everything came crashing down the way it did.
Yeah.
But I've been able to be sort of an outlet for people with these unusual types of fantasies to like,
Yeah.
hey, it's, it's okay. Like you're not alone.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Before we get, because I want to talk about some of the websites, you said a phrase there. It's a phrase or it's a terminology that everybody hears, but sometimes we hear a word so much we don't even know what it means. You said BDSM. Can you explain exactly what BDSM is?
Oh, sure. So it's bondage, domination, sadomasochism. I think
Okay.
that there are alternate um, ways that people describe it, but it's people into bondage. They're dominant people are more into the aspect of having power over somebody. Then you have the submissive side where women and men. There's men who are into being submissives, like they would be on the receiving end of being tied up and under someone else's control. Um, so that's the gist of it. That's the BDSM 101 sort of.
Okay. So what started out as a general interest in BDSM, maybe some porn, maybe even something that we might not even think is weird, maybe started out as something basic or BDSM. I mean, nowadays, BDSM, I don't even know if it's even taboo anymore. You just it's kind of like pop songs written about it. I mean, there's so many things about it, but some of
Yeah.
the websites you start visiting, Gil, Dark Fetish Net, Sexy Amazons, Dark Fet, Motherless, Fet Life.
Yeah.
Some of the names that you're using on these websites, Girl Dealer, Girl Meat Hunter. You also have a screen name. Is it M Hal? Is that the
Yeah, that sounds right. Again, it's been a while.
M Hal 52?
Yeah.
That's another screen name that you're using. And you're talking, you're talking to other people. We'll talk later. There is co-conspirators in this case. I'm not going to get too much into them. I really just want to focus on, you here.
Yeah.
But you start going down these role-playing fantasies, as you mentioned before, cannibalism, kidnapping,
Rape, the whole like all this really
right,
violent stuff that's very, very disturbing. For
right,
sure. Like people on the outside who first come across this and read it, I mean, it's really horrifying stuff
yeah,
to read. And part of the role play is part of the interaction with these other people while you're this anonymous screen name, right? I'm not Gil Valle on this. I'm just this screen name. I'm this character. I'm this monster, right? And
right,
part of the deal is all right. Like you talking with someone, all right. I'm gonna outdo the grotesqueness of like what All right, you're into this thing. All right, here's what we just go back and forth. Like who could be more screwed up? Who could be more
right. Who
violent?
could?
And it turned to that. And again, a huge part of it is my face isn't like no one knows who I am. I don't know who they are. It's this whole anonymous thing. So it was just like side box, this thing I
Yeah,
engaged in, not every day, but a couple times a week. And I was able to compartmentalize my real life from my fantasy life. My fantasy life, I was this horrible monster. It was, roped with these stories about kidnapping women, raping women, and women that I had personal connections to.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the other
yeah,
part of it that really scares people. The photos of women that I knew taken from their Facebook accounts, shared with these other people I was chatting with. That is not something I'm proud of. Not something I wish I never did. Certainly not moral, ethical. It's one part of the case that really frightens people.
okay.
And I get it. I understand it. I totally understand it.
Yeah, so right. So you're talking about all these fantasies of kidnapping, cannibalizing. You're looking at graphic imagery of which. No, I know that some of these websites were Russian based, and you had a lot of people in other countries talking all this, odd stuff, and there was imagery there. I assume it's women or men acting out these weird things where it looks like a woman's tied up and she's about to get eaten, or so there's a bunch of stuff like that, and you're all kind of just trying to outdo each other, right? Who can come up with the most craziest scenario? Who could? and who's going to play along, and we're going to get this whole back and forth going.
Yeah, and then there was another element was, trying to sound real, made it more titillating, so it was more enjoyable for the people who were doing these role plays.
Right.
That was just another little piece of information that just made it.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned that what made it real for people is that at some point you start making it as real as you can without really actually stepping over the line, because you start involving people Now, to my knowledge, I don't think you ever used your wife's name directly, but you described like she's with a child or she's in a room. You were kind of describing your wife without really using her name as.
I don't think I ever even shared. I would use her photo and other women's photos, but I don't think I ever said to anyone that, hey, this is my wife, this is my, like,
Right.
I don't think people, I just think she was a photo, right? A photo,
Right.
a woman that I know, but I don't believe I ever shared that I was married to her, or that she was a girlfriend at the time, or anything like that, or that she has a kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you did use, so in these conversations, so your wife, now there was a woman named Elisa Friscia who was a teacher, former co-worker of your wife.
Yes.
Andrea Noble, Ohio prosecutor, college friend of yours.
Yep.
Kimberly Sauer, college friend. Kristen Ponticelli, 2012 graduate of Archbishop Malloy High School, your alma mater.
Yep.
And the government also said that you had discussed kidnapping a Maureen Hardigan, a woman who you were friendly with since high school. So these are the, for lack of a better term, cast of characters that you're using, who are real life people that with the exception of the high school. We'll get to that.
I never met her.
With the exception of that one, Kristen Ponticelli. So you're using images of these people. You're getting as close to making this thing real for you without taking the step. What was the motivation behind? Was that what it was? What was the motivation behind talking about these women, talking about kidnapping these women, cannibalizing them, and sharing these deep, dark thoughts and what you would say role playing with these other men? What was the motivation behind using real women? Was it just to make it real, just as possible?
It's just the visual stimulation to add to the words, the visual photo of a woman who's attractive, like, okay, like this one would be good for us to kidnap and rape and eat and all that stuff. I was very careful about not sharing any real identifying information. I never shared a last name. I never shared a location. Right. Part of these stories was I had this cabin up in the mountains in the middle of nowhere, and that's where these women were going to be brought to be, cooked and eaten in an oven or on a spit or whatever. I mean, it's all like just, again, it's to talk about this stuff. Yeah. It's really tough. So while there's this cabin right in the middle of nowhere, like that's supposedly where that place never existed. I'm talking from my Forest Hills apartment where this stuff could never happen. Right. I live in a 6-story building, neighbors below me, neighbors next door, like it could literally not happen. I never owned a cabin. There was no mountain house, nothing like that. But that was just sort of, if I did have a place like that, that's something that to add to the story that made it more realistic. That's something that could happen. It was just part of the fantasy to make it more titillating, more realistic.
And the idea, we'll get to what you mentioned with these places not existing and all this stuff, because that's some of the stuff that actually ends up kind of saving you in the end. But I just want to read, because I want to give people a clear picture of actually some of the things, Gil. I have some chat logs, if you don't mind. So this is in reference to Elisa Friscia, who was a teacher and former co-worker of your wife, and you're talking to a guy by the screen name Mike Venice 81. And this is what he says to you. I'm quoting. This is all quotes, ladies and gentlemen. So he is speaking to you. You're under the screen name Hal M. And he says, what I want to do is make her my slave, sex, maid, and otherwise. I will cause her to play my fantasies, and I would do what I like. If she gets pregnant, I will kill her. If she cheats, I will kill her. If she tries to leave first, she'll get a bad beating and she'll be hung. And then your response to this is very, very nice. She's a sweet girl. Not sure how soon before she would submit. I will abduct her right out of the apartment, stuff her into a large piece of luggage, tie her hands and feet up, and then you ask him if you want her to have her clothes on or do you want her to be naked. Essentially, I guess when you deliver this body to this other person who you're acting this out with, and you guys go on to discuss sexual assault, hanging, cannibalism, stuff like that. That's one example. You go into another example of, I'm going to go into another example. This is Kimberly Sauer. This is somebody you knew from college, correct?
Yeah.
From Maryland. And you're also, again, under the screen name mhal52. And so you're talking to a guy who's using the name Meat Market Man. And you're saying that on Labor Day, September 3rd, you're going to go to her place. Well, you're going to go to her place on the 2nd. Labor Day's the 3rd. You're going to kidnap her from there, and you're going to get to cooking her on Monday afternoon. He says, oh, I thought we would do this for Thanksgiving. You said, no, it's too cold for a cookout. He says, of course. So when do you want me to come over? I'll be staying with you. And you said, yeah, you'll be staying. It's you're at the mountain retreat. You guys are going to escape to the mountain retreat with the body of this woman. And after you have these conversations, when you talk about going to the mountain retreat, this is in July of 2012. And on July 20th of 2012, you're going to use the internet to conduct a number of searches relating to kidnapping, how to kidnap somebody, how to abduct somebody, how to chloroform a girl. Can you use chloroform to have sex with your girlfriend, and other stuff about kidnapping? This is in that same time frame where you're speaking about this college friend.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you travel with your wife and infant daughter to Maryland on July 21st, 2012, and you spend the weekend there. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're spending the weekend with this woman, Kimberly Sauer, who you have weeks prior engaged in all these fantasies of kidnapping her, cannibalizing her, and from you, this is just a fantasy. But I got to ask you, Gil, when you're actually there, what's going through your mind? Is these chats escaping your mind? Are you able to separate this internet chat stuff, or is it crossing your mind? Like let's say you're in the yard, you guys are having a barbecue, she's sitting across from you. What is that feeling that you're getting at that moment?
Well, that weekend, I saw several people. It wasn't just her. I met her for brunch, very brief. It was an hour or so. And the chats never entered my mind. I'm being dead honest. Like I said earlier, I was always able to put one thing in one box, put my real life in another box, and the two never crossed. I mean, the proximity of the chats with Kimberly to seeing her was a little bit of a coincidence.
Okay.
But I would go to Maryland twice a year, 3 times a year, and I would see her every single time I went down there, since I graduated. So this wasn't, part of the case, they painted this one instance as like, oh my God, like he graduated, he hasn't talked to her, and all of a sudden he has this chat about her. He goes to Maryland and he sees her, like, oh my God. Yeah. But I saw her every time I went down there.
Okay.
Twice, 3 times a year. She was one of the people I would always call to get together for lunch, dinner, whatever.
Okay.
So going to Maryland was not unusual. Seeing her was not unusual. But in the context of the case, they painted out, it seemed from the way they painted the picture that it was something nefarious going on.
Right. And once again, this is someone that you're chatting about, and in your chats, you're trying to make this thing, as we discussed before, kind of as real as possible without actually going through with it. So,
which is not, I want to be clear, like it's not okay at all.
Right.
Part of my message when I was invited to present at CrimeCon, in New Orleans. It's this big true crime event on the weekend. They wanted me there as a speaker one year. Okay. I had a packed room. I mean, they said it was the second biggest attended event, my presentation. And even before then, like my message to people was like, look, I was an asshole. I was a bad husband. I was all that stuff. You can think of whatever you want. You can think I'm a jerk. You can think I'm a prick. You can think all that stuff, and that's fine. You're probably right. But is that reason enough to put someone in jail for life? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yeah, ethically, morally, this stuff is horrifying. Horrifying. I cringe when you were reading those chats. I was like cringing at what I was hearing. Like, I can't believe I wrote that shit, but I did. And at the time, I wrote that stuff. It's late at night, like not thinking of like, oh, I'm this screen name. I'm just whatever, just whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Just
Well, yeah,
whatever.
and I think that's a good message, Gil. I commend you for that. They're inviting you essentially to these crime cons, which is cool. I mean, but they're kind of inviting you as like kind of like a sideshow. I mean, everyone's excited. There's this Cannibal Cop there, but if you could be honest and say, listen, the truth is, guys, I was being an asshole. I was being, maybe a bad husband. I was engaging in things that were messing up my life. And I think, being able to own up to it at this point and not, because some people, they do things in their life and then, they manage to play into it and push harder into it because, they get an advantage out of that, whether it helps them sell a book or go to a crime con or what. Any situation doesn't even have to be that specific. They could lean into it even more. So ultimately what happens, Gil, is your wife is getting a little suspicious and she says you're up all night. You're on the computer all night. She gets a glimpse of something someday that she doesn't like. And she decides that she is going to place some spyware device on your computer that's going to basically record all the keystrokes. It's going to take images of the computer. And she's going to discover all this. I mean, all these chat logs, all these websites, Dark Fetish, Amazons, all these websites, some of them which are not United States based.
Yeah.
She is going to see all this stuff. When she approaches you, well, all right, yeah. When she approaches you, what is that conversation like? When she shows you, listen, look what I found.
She woke me up in the morning, said she was leaving. I said, what's going on? She said, I saw what you've been doing on the computer. And I first tried to play kind of stupid. Like, I'm thinking, what could she have possibly seen? I thought I was being careful. And then she says, like, cook women, grill them. That's what we are to you. So that's when I knew. I was like, oh shit, she found all this stuff. I was. My intent was never to have to discuss this with anyone in real life, let alone my wife, right? I was always, this is going to be one part of, this is a secret that I have that's never going to get out. No one's ever going to know. I'm going to still be a cop. I'm going to still have my family. I'm still going to be the regular Gil, the popular guy that everyone respected, everyone's friends with. Now all of a sudden, my feelings are minimal compared to what she was going through. Right. She was horrified, right? I don't want to minimize that, but from my end, it's like, okay, I'm 27 years old. This has been a secret my whole life. Now all of a sudden, I'm being confronted by my wife. It was a tough situation. I wasn't fully honest with her. I was trying to sort of minimize what was going on. She didn't really get a grasp of the extent of these chats, right? She just found sort of the surface, not so much was going on beneath. But, the conversation was, okay, I'm going to get out of town for a while. I'm going to take the baby. I'm going to go with my parents. Maybe when I come back, we'll find a couples therapist and we'll work all this stuff out, whatever you're into. That was the initial plan. What was painted in the court case, what was painted in the newspapers was, oh my God, she found this stuff and took the baby and ran out of the house with nothing but the clothes on her back. Like that. That's not at all what happened. Right. It was maybe 5-6 hours before she left. She was packing all her stuff. I was playing with the baby. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be, right? She seems to be okay. I was definitely into her suggestion of finding a couples therapist. We'll talk all this stuff out. Yeah. She was freaked out, but, the plan was originally, let's work through this and figure it out. Eventually she gets home and I've never spoken to her. So I don't want to put words in her mouth, but at some point she got deeper into it. She was horrified. She showed it to somebody and whoever that was convinced her to go to the police.
Okay. I want to ask you something also.
Yeah.
There is a guy on YouTube. His name is Dr. Grande. I don't know if you've ever came across him. He's got a pretty huge YouTube channel. I don't know if he's a clinical psychiatrist. He's got a pretty big channel. I mean, he's millions of views.
Yeah.
And he did a story on you kind of talking about it. And his thing is like, he's not trying to diagnose anyone. He's just trying to talk about it. And he brought up something that honestly, I didn't think of at all, Gil. He mentioned that he thought it was a little weird and odd that your ex-wife now put the spyware on the computer, whereas usually maybe the wife will maybe sit you down and be like, before she gets to that, Gil, is there something going on? You're up late, are you having an affair? What's going on? She felt so strongly to put that spyware on. Did you think that was weird? Did you have any resentment against her for doing that in the back of your mind, that it was a little excessive?
I never faulted her for how she reacted to any of this, right?
Okay.
I had problems later on in the case with how life in our home was presented. I didn't think that was accurate at all. Basically, I was painted out to be this deadbeat dad. This guy was totally not interested in anything to do with her or the baby, and that just wasn't true. But we'll get into that later. But I never really thought of. Look, she had her suspicions. I think she thought I was having an affair or something. That's why she put the spyware on. She never could have imagined what she was going to find. That's why I never faulted her for how she reacted with anything, because for anyone to come across that kind of stuff has got to be scary. And that's putting it mildly, especially when it's your husband doing it. You had no idea what was going on. I hope, I'm not sure if that's satisfactory, but I just it's not what you brought up was something that never really crossed my mind. I never wanted to blame her for anything. What she felt she needed to do to find out what was going on with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, yeah. I don't think I guess in the end she was warranted, but I never thought of that either until, like I said, I saw this guy's video and he brought up that he thought maybe it was a little odd that was kind of like the first step. Spyware, but hey, listen, sometimes people have intuition and I guess she was correct that there was something going on. So she's going to go to the authorities, and what's going to happen is the feds are going to knock on your door in October of 2012. They're going to come knocking.
Yep, October 24th.
Yep.
2012. Yep.
They're going to come knocking on your door, and you are going to be indicted. It's a 2-count indictment.
Yes.
From October the 25th of 2012. And this is Preet Bharara is the United States attorney. And this is the United States of America versus Gilberto Valle. And count 1 from the grand jury, I'll just read this, from at least in or about January 2012 up to and including on or about October 24th, 2012 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Gilberto Valle, the defendant, and others known and unknown, willfully and knowingly did combine, conspire, confederate, and agree together and with each other to violate Title 18, United States Code Section 1201. So we'll look into those. It was a part of a conspiracy that you and other co-conspirators, known and unknown, would unlawfully seize, confine, inveigle, decoy, kidnap, abduct, and carry away and hold for ransom and reward and otherwise a person and use a means, facility, and instrumentality of interstate commerce in committing and in furtherance of the commission of the kidnapping. I know that's a lot of language, but it's basically saying that you're conspiring to kidnap people, women in your case.
Yeah.
And then it also goes on, there's an ABC section. 1 talks about you're using the internet and electronic instant messaging program, and you're communicating about kidnapping, cooking and eating parts of women. And they mention you, as we discussed before, going to Maryland to that one trip.
Yes.
And count 2 they're going to charge you with, Gil, is on May 31st, 2012. You were knowingly accessing a computer without authorization and exceeding authorized access. Basically, you were using the police computers to conduct searches on people, unlawfully doing that. So, from their angle, from the United States, isn't it funny when they say United States in these indictments, the whole country's against you?
Yeah,
350 million people versus Gil, right?
yeah, 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 it's true.
So, they're saying that you're going to kidnap, you're going to cannibalize women. In one case, you actually went to visit a woman, and then you're using police computers for searches, which it's kind of tricky. Are you authorized to use those or not? In a sense, you are, but you are specifically use them to obtain information and to look into what they view as possible victims of your sick will to kidnap and cannibalize people. So you get hit with this indictment, I'm sure, and you obtain an attorney, and your attorney is basically going over this stuff with you, right? And
Yeah.
she is telling you all of this. Julia Gatto, right? Julia Gatto. When you're being presented this, Gil, what is going through your mind? My life is over. I'm finished for. I'm getting conspiracy to murder, to eat people.
Yeah, if I can just reverse one step, when the FBI brings me in, that whole time I'm thinking, okay, let me just be open and honest about this shit, right? Yeah, I was engaging. Like, I knew why they were there. My police file was clean. I had nothing else going on the side. I was like, okay, they're here because of my shit that I was doing on the internet. Okay, let me just explain it to them. I'll be upfront. I'll be honest, and they'll say, cut the shit out, go home, and that's it. That's what I was thinking that whole day. Just
Okay.
nothingness, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, then like fast forward a little later, everyone's like, oh my God, why didn't you get a lawyer? Why'd you let them question you? It was like, because I'm innocent, because I just wanted to be upfront and honest with them and just tell them what was going on, why I was doing it. Yeah, but it's not real, it's all fake. They have to know it's all fake, right? I'm in my mind thinking, okay, I chatted about this stupid mountain house. Like, they have to know that place doesn't exist. They have to.
A basement. You have this big basement torture chamber, but you live in an
Yeah,
apartment.
like
You don't.
human-sized ovens, like all these elements that were put into these role plays and stories that just never existed. So
Right.
that whole day, I'm thinking, all right, yeah, I'm at the FBI office, I'm being interrogated, all that shit, but let me just. I'm thinking like if I get a lawyer, it's gonna make me look like something, that I'm guilty, right? Let me just come clean. I'll talk to them. I'll answer whatever questions they have, and that was it. Then at the end of the interview, you get into, you're being charged with this and that. And even still, I'm thinking, all right, I'll go in front of a judge, I'll get bail, whatever. I'm trying to keep it all as positive as I can. I'm thinking about my family, like, oh my God, what if they find out? What if Kathleen, my wife, finds out? At that time, I didn't realize that she was involved to the extent that she was. I was concerned about her. I was concerned about my parents, my brother. I was concerned, everyone, my friends, my work colleagues. I was like, what if these people find out? Like, what's going to happen? And then, the next day when I'm in court, as you described, I'm being, the charges are being read. They start mentioning this carries a life sentence in prison. That's when it started to really like crash on me. Like, oh my God. And then I'm thinking about all that, but I'm also listening to what they're saying, and I'm like, I know a lot of the stuff they're saying isn't true. Like, I just know it. Like, they're presenting all these, like he went to Maryland as part of the plan to kidnap this girl. I was like, no, I didn't. There's that, right? And then we talked about my ex-wife's teacher friend before, and they said, oh, like he was, stalking her. Like, we used GPS tracking, and it turns out he was not in the area. He was on her block, like actually stalking her. And I'm thinking, like, that is not true either. I remember, I'm writing all this stuff down, giving it to my lawyer, just writing it down. But at that point, there's really nothing we could say. We have no defense at that point.
Gil, I want to ask you about one of the women you spoke about.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Kristen Ponticelli, 2012 graduate of Archbishop Molloy High School. Where did that come from?
Facebook, right? I was browsing Facebook. Maybe she was a friend of a friend or something. I saw her, came across her profile. I was like, oh, she's very cute, blah, blah, blah. But she had graduated by then. I was always very careful, like make sure everything is like 18 plus, right?
Right.
Always like no children involved.
Okay.
So I mean, it's not okay. It's messed up.
No,
But,
yeah. No, I understand. It's not okay. Yeah. I didn't mean it like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, Gil, you get sent to MCC. Is that correct?
Yes.
Manhattan Correctional Center.
Solitary confinement, right off the bat.
Solitary confinement in Manhattan Correctional Center. And for people listening who aren't aware of what that place is, I mean, that's a place that is held anywhere from mafia contract killers, like guys like Sammy the Bull, terrorists like Ramzi Youssef, the first World Trade bomber, more recently El Chapo, Jeffrey Epstein. So solitary confinement in MCC is an infamous place, which has held some of the worst criminals. And now you're there in solitary. Part of it has to do with you being a police officer. That has something to do with it. It's not that you're a mass murderer like El Chapo or something. But we've heard from former mob guys that have spent time in there where you have this little tiny window where you can barely just see outside to get some sun and some daylight coming in. Can you describe what it's like being in solitary confinement in MCC?
Yeah, it's a very small cell. Like you said, it's a very narrow window with bars in it, so you could barely even see outside. Now, it's funny, a few days after I was arrested, Hurricane Sandy hit New York. And so the whole place like shut down. There was no phone calls. So I had no communication with my family at all. And I had no idea how bad, even looking out the window, I couldn't tell how bad. Nothing but big buildings right across from me. I had no idea the devastation, how bad the hurricane was. They even stopped, like the lawyers couldn't come visit. So I was like literally in the dark, had no contact with anybody for 3 or 4 days. So that was one of the more challenging parts of this whole thing. I could imagine the headlines in the papers. I didn't have access to them, but I could imagine what was going on. I was just worried about my family. I was worried about everything, right? But solitary confinement, the walls were thin enough where I was able to talk to the person next to me. Early on, maybe a couple days into it, he knocked on, he just like, hey, check on me, how you doing? Am I right? He said, I gotta tell you, from what I read in the paper, I didn't see any crime committed. So right there, I'm thinking, okay, so at least someone gets it, right? So he turned out to be a big sports fan. We were talking about sports. One of the guards, the correctional officers, seemed to very much be in my corner as well. From the first day, they were like, "Hey, just stay strong. You'll get through it." One guy slipped me a radio, so I was able to.
Really?
Yeah, because I didn't have commissary. I didn't know what the hell commissary was. Right? My family doesn't know anything about this stuff, but he slipped me a radio just to keep me, for lack of a better word, entertained, just take my mind out of there if possible, which really it wasn't. My mind was always on the case. Every hearing I went to, it was just more and more BS and more lies they were spewing, and it was so frustrating that they can just say that stuff. We had no way to fight it. At that point, we had to wait till trial, basically. But
yeah. Was there any notable people in there where you were there? Did you hear anybody that somebody was down the hall? Maybe you had this...
Bernie Carrick was down the hall from me.
Oh, really?
Wow. The old police commissioner. He was there maybe a couple, 2 or 3 weeks. I never spoke to him, but he was there a couple of weeks, and then he was eventually released.
That was like financial crimes that he was in trouble for?
Yes, I guess something like that. I never got
something like that, right?
Yeah. Financial, yeah. Look, for me, I never experienced jail. So in my mind, solitary confinement, it sucks, but it's the only experience I had. So I was like, listen, at least I'm away from the general population where people know I'm a cop. Like that's, that could be a problem. At least I know I'm safe here. No one's going to get to me. No one's going to kick my ass. Now, the problem was there were rules for people who were in that unit. Like people were sent there mostly for punishment. So they had their phone calls reduced to 1 phone call a month, 115 minutes. So I was subject to those same rules, even though I wasn't there for punishment. So once all that got settled in, it was hard. It was hard to talk to my family once a month. Everyone had to go to one place. I got to talk, 3 minutes to my dad, 3 minutes to my mom, who hate each other. My mom and dad, like I said, they divorced when I was young.
Yeah.
But they got together to, for those days when I was going to call, they sat together during the whole trial, which was weird, just me knowing they hate each other, they hate each other's guts. To see them sitting together, to support me was interesting from my view. But
yeah, we spoke about news headlines before, and I remember this case very vividly because I don't know if I've ever seen the press have more fun with a criminal case, unfortunately, than your case. I mean, some of the puns that they were using. I mean, I'll show something right. I mean, this is the New York Post. Law and Order, chef of police, to prepare and serve, finest young cannibal, stop in fricassee. I guess that's frisk. NYPDU instead of blue. I mean, and these were like, I'm sorry, let me get rid of that. And these were nonstop. I mean, these were just all the time. But you didn't really get to see that, right? Being in solitary.
No, I never saw any of that, but I had an idea. People were, other inmates were sort of through a wall telling me kind of what was going on. I could imagine it, right? But I forgot who made the point. It might have been one of the paralegals on the defense team said, look, like they're having so much fun with it. It's a sign that like they don't think this is a serious thing. Like they think this is if I was this on the verge of really like being this monster, like really about to kidnap people, like the press wouldn't have treated it as such a circus.
Yeah.
So that was a sign that maybe like people in the public were sort of understanding what was going on. But the challenge was everything that was being reported was stuff that was being said by the U.S. attorneys, by just stuff that just was not accurate, factually not true. Right. And it turned out when the trial started, I can give you one example. At the first bail hearing, like I said, they were saying, oh, he was not, we have GPS evidence that shows he was not just in this girl's area, he was on her very block, stalking her. Okay. So later on, pre-trial hearing, my lawyers start challenging because we had our own experts examining cell phone data, cell phone like site towers and all that stuff. And we had information to show that, hey, just because his cell phone pings off a certain tower doesn't mean that he's on that,
Yeah, it's accounting for a broad area.
Basically. Yeah. So we got them to admit, okay, he wasn't on her block, but he was within a 500-yard radius, all in Manhattan. That could be anywhere, right? Yeah. So this is one example of what they said early on that really scared people. Like, oh my God, he was actually on this woman's block stalking her. So no, he could have been anywhere within a 500-yard radius. Okay. It turns out with that particular victim, right, who they labeled as a victim, it was not just that, but they said, oh, he gave her a token. He had a token sent to her to try to get closer to her. It turns out that was a PBA card, a patrolman's benevolence. Yep. Cops get the PBA card to give the friends, family, and all that stuff. I had my text message records, conversations with my wife, talking about that. The PBA card. She said, if you give one to Elisa, she'll be tickled pink was a phrase she used. She'll be tickled pink if she got a PBA card. She loved the fact that I was a cop, all that stuff. So yeah, that was the token. That was a creepy token, right? My ex-wife delivered the PBA card to her when she was at work. Like that again, that's something so innocent like that turned into an overt act as part of a conspiracy. It's really crazy stuff and really infuriating at the time, knowing the way things are being painted and what the truth was. It was just so frustrating, so angering to have to. Yeah. And that's the stuff early on in the case that was being reported in the media, right? Okay. So people get their first impressions of the case, and even still to this day, I read comments, people write about the case like, oh my God, like he was like stalking the girl, and they said he was on the girl's block. And just people's first impressions are, it's tough to get those out of people's heads.
I told somebody I was interviewing him, and he goes, "Isn't he in jail?" I said, "No, he's." I said, "No, he's not."
It's been almost 9 years now, man.
Yeah. So during the trial, your defense is creating this. They're creating this defense that this is all role play, this is all fantasy. And at one point, they actually bring in somebody pretty high profile. They're going to bring in Dr. Park Dietz, who is a forensic psychiatrist, and this is a guy who's spoken to anybody from Jeffrey Dahmer to Joel Rifkin. He's given his professional advice on cases like the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. I mean, you've seen him on HBO in the 90s interviewing Richard the Iceman Kuklinski. He's in those documentaries. Now, you got to speak to this gentleman. Is that correct?
He spent 3 days at MCC with me doing a full forensic psychological evaluation.
Right.
Three full days. I was beyond exhausted at the end of those 3 days.
Did you know who he was before you spoke to him?
Not really. My legal team sort of explained who he was to me, but I hadn't seen any literature or any footage of him. I hadn't heard of him.
Okay.
They explained to me that he was sort of a heavy hitter in the field of forensic psychology. So.
Yeah, and it's through this conversation that you let him in on something, that a certain scene from a movie that you became. Is that true, or is that not true?
It's one thing that came up. Like, you know, he was asking, okay, so like, is there anything like you remember from your childhood, any scene, a movie scene? And I mentioned a couple things, and one of them was that one, the Cameron Diaz in a mask tied up. I thought she looked really hot like that. So that was like the one thing that blew up. But I gave other instances too. It's just like.
Have you ever thought about why he asked you that about the movie scene?
He was just interested in what, like, the kinds of videos, the kinds of imagery that would stimulate me when I was first discovering I was into these kinds of fantasies. So I was explaining that was one, you know, more prominent example that came up because it was a movie that a lot of people knew. So that turned into, oh my God, like that scene in the mask created a Cannibal Cop. Like it wasn't.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting, actually, Gil. I don't know if you know this, because I've read a lot on Joel Rifkin, and I've done a story on my channel on him also. And he spoke to Dr. Park Dietz as well. And something that Rifkin often spoke about, and I'm not saying you're Rifkin, you know, Rifkin's one of the worst people that's ever walked the earth. I mean, something that he spoke about was his obsession with a scene from a movie called Frenzy, which was an Alfred Hitchcock film. And he was obsessed with this film, and he was obsessed specifically with this guy called the Necktie Murderer, because he would strangle women, and to dispose of them, he would put them in like a trunk, like a big box. And he was obsessed with this movie and those scenes from that movie. And essentially, he did go on to put women in trunks, and he was almost mimicking that. So I wonder if Park Dietz kind of, maybe that might have been one of the first times he ran into something like that. It just made me wonder. I don't know if you.
It could have been. I mean, I don't know what his motivation was asking me that. I assume it seemed like a very, like, two guys chatting over a beer. So a lot, you know, just to dumb it down to that extent. Like that was the tone of the conversation. He just wanted to really know about my upbringing, and it was just, he asked me, like, do you remember any movies or television shows or anything you've read that sort of stimulated you? And that was one thing I mentioned out of maybe 5 or 6. And
but ultimately he chalks it up to you just living in this fantasy fairy tale world. He doesn't compare you to these crazy guys that he's actually been in contact with that have eaten people and murdered people, but they don't use him. Your defense team doesn't put him on the stand. What is the reason behind that?
Because we felt the case was so open and shut that we didn't need him. The bad stuff, quote unquote, was over. Like, they had the FBI agent on the stand, reading all the chats, reading all that stuff. It was like 2 days of him just reading all the kind of chat logs. You know, why this is a real. Then our defense, my Robert Baum defense lawyer, went up and just destroyed the guy. Absolutely. The basis of their case was, okay, they had 24 sets of chats. 21 were fantasy and 3 were real. So Robert pointed out things from the 21 fake chats that were also part of, you know, the same sort of scenario, right? The mountain house, all that stuff that, you know, they were all 24 were fake. So he was pointing out examples where the real chats had elements from the fake chats. So there's just like, I mean, we felt so good that their case was just a sham. Like, there were people in the courtroom laughing. There were Julia There was a break in the case for a day. She showed me an article from the New York Post saying, oh, like, do you hear that sound of the toilet flushing? It's the government's case being flushed down. Like the case is ridiculous. It's absolutely freaking ridiculous. So we felt, okay, the chats were done. Like, why go back there? Why go back to the forensic, to the psychology of it? It was shown that this is all fake. This is all nonsense. Just why complicate matters with the jury? That was our feeling. There was also something that they were concerned with, and I never got the story, but they were concerned with something that might have come up with Dr. Dietz under cross-examination, something with one of his other cases. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, I saw somebody else talking on the HBO documentary. There's a real one of these psychologists. He was like really animated. I think he was saying something like, if he goes on there and says that, you know, some of the stuff that you were doing doesn't lead to killing, how is he gonna, you know, go on with his career, actually speaking on people that did the same thing you did and actually did kill people? I guess it might have been a conflict somewhere there.
Yeah, what it came down to for us was we felt the case was so weak. We felt that FBI agent was just destroyed on cross-examination. We felt the case was really strong and we didn't need to put Park D to just complicate things even more.
Right. So, Gil, in Tuesday, March 12th, 2013, you're going to be convicted and you're going to be guilty of those 2 counts. And the New York Post is having fun again. Chopped liver. Cannibal Cop guilty. That's you on the New York Post. This is them. You know, they were doing this nonstop.
Yep.
So now you're guilty. You're looking at the worst case, life in prison.
Life in prison. And that's where my mind went right away.
Yeah.
You know, when the verdict was read, we were all kind of stunned. We were all. I remember Julia was sitting next to me. Her head like slumped forward. Like we were surprised. We thought at worst case scenario was going to be a hung jury.
Yeah.
Just because we felt there's no way 12 people can come together and conclude that this was a real conspiracy, just based on the way what the trial turned out to be. But they did come back with a guilty verdict, and I was stunned. I went, you know, the marshals took me to the back, and I freaking lost it. I started bawling my eyes out, crying. I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm done. I'm going to jail.
I can't even imagine. And at that point, you'd been in solitary for months, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, we fast tracked the trial. Like, I was arrested in October, and we went. The trial, as you mentioned, was over in March. That's a very fast.
I noticed that. Yeah.
And our thinking was, I'm innocent. Let's get this done. Let's go to trial. There's no reason to prolong it, right? The government was trying to prolong it because it's funny. I'm sitting in my cell one day, just staring up at the ceiling, and I was actually laughing at the thought of them trying to scramble to try and find a mountain house that doesn't exist, or like the white van that was going to be used to transport. I'm like sitting there laughing, like they must be scrambling.
The ovens in the basement.
That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They were trying to push trial back. The judge is like, wait a second, you know, he has a right to a speedy trial. If you don't have the evidence, like, that's not his problem.
Yeah.
You know, basically his point was you should have thought of this stuff before you went and arrested the guy.
Yeah. So they're going to convict you, and basically, they go over again. A court-authorized search of his computer revealed that Valle had created files pertaining to at least 80 women and containing multiple photographs of each woman. The computer also contained personal information about some women, including relevant addresses, physical descriptions, photographs, electronic communications.
Yeah, what they didn't say was all that stuff was fake, right?
Right, and they said you drafted an operation plan to abduct and cook an identified woman, research methods of disabling and drugging women, and at one point, which we didn't mention, you actually discussed this role play of how much are you going to sell this woman to for me, and you guys agree on $5,000. So drugging women, you agreed with at least one co-conspirator individual to kidnap a woman, and he would pay you $5,000 for that woman. So what happens next, Gil? You go back to MCC?
Yeah.
You go back to MCC and you got an appeal.
MCC, my lawyers came and visited me right away. They said, listen, like, you know, we feel really good about the appeal. Like, don't start thinking worst case. Like, there was a lot of issues with the case. The closing argument from the prosecutor was, they said, full of, which I didn't know, but they said it was just full of like misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, just a whole lot of things. So they did their paperwork. Meanwhile, I'm still there. Again, the guards were like very, very good with me. Very good. The captain called me in. I was sitting in the captain's office, the captain of MCC, right? He's sitting there. He's like, first thing he said was, "I thought you were going home today after I was convicted." He's like, I cannot believe." So I got this reassurance right away from guards, from the marshals that brought me in after I was. A lot of people were stunned at the verdict, so that made me feel okay. As okay as I could be facing life in prison, right? So the captain says that, right? I thought you were going home, blah, blah, blah. Said, if you ever want to try general population, I know you've been in solitary confinement for a very long time. I said, I'll stay in solitary for a little bit. My lawyers are coming basically every day to talk to me. So it's okay for now. Eventually I decided to go to general population. That's later on. But my lawyers sent me the paperwork, the appeals that they filed, and I just was like so proud and so like, I mean, they did such a good job with the paperwork. We felt pretty good that we were going to get a new trial just based on the misconduct they highlighted, the lack of evidence in the case. We felt really, really good. And eventually people were, trickling. I was getting some information that there were legal experts commenting about the case. And, a lot of people were stunned at the verdict, and the general consensus was he's going to get a new trial. So that was sort of keeping me functioning, in a positive of a state of mind as I could be in.
Because it came down to this whole issue of thought crimes, right? I mean, that's the main theme of this trial, thought crimes. Do you prosecute somebody and throw them away potentially for their life over thought crimes versus are these thought crimes? Was he actually going to do this? And you do get the appeal. And we'll just fast forward. I mean, so you're convicted in March 12th of 2013, and you're looking at, I might spend the rest of my life. And then this happens in July of 2014. Cannibal Cop conviction tossed.
Yep.
Here you go again. If you can't eat them, rejoin them.
Yeah.
There you go. And that's your mom, who's great, by the way. I mean, watching your mom in that HBO documentary. I mean,
my whole family was tremendous. My whole family from day one, they never thought any of this was real. But my mom was sort of like the voice of the family. Everyone else was sort of behind the scenes, but they were all very much involved and supporting me and, all that kind of stuff. The conviction being tossed came out of nowhere. That was one of the most difficult things was, okay, this paperwork's in and it looks great, but there was no date to look forward to, that the judge is going to rule on such and such date.
Right.
My lawyers guessed maybe by like Christmas, like by the end of the year, he'll have something, but they filed their paperwork in May and, June, July, August. Christmas comes and goes, still nothing, and it goes all the way until July. So it was tough to, not have a date to look forward to. Right. And then all of a sudden it came out of nowhere. Like, I was done. And it's done. And he didn't just, we felt good about a new trial. He went the actual step of throwing out the conviction and straight up acquitting me, which never happens. Never. Like, someone told me a percentage of times that it's like over 99%, the judge just throws that motion out. It's called a Rule 29 motion. Rule
29. Yeah, so what the judge basically says is, under the unique circumstances of this extraordinary case, the court concludes that the evidence offered by the government at trial is not sufficient to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that Valle entered into a genuine agreement to kidnap a woman or that he specifically intended to commit a kidnapping. Accordingly, the jury's verdict on count 1, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, cannot stand, and count 1 will be dismissed. As to count 2, Gil, they're saying that you did use these databases that you weren't supposed to use. You kind of used them, and you were unauthorized to use them in the fashion that you used them in. And if you were to seek a new trial to appeal that charge, that motion will be denied. But at that point, you had already spent 21 months in MCC, right?
Yes.
Prior to this acquittal.
Yes.
21 months. So it became a case of basically time served, right?
It did. And eventually that second count got overturned as well. That was another, this whole there was this whole myth that I was using the computer to, you mentioned before, it had files of like 80 women on the computer, and people seem to think, oh my God, like he was using the work computer to get addresses and he was recording all those addresses. They charged me with one instance with the lady you mentioned earlier, Maureen. She was a
Yes.
high school friend of mine.
Yeah.
She had actually testified in the case, and correctly, that she knew I was a police officer. She had gotten into a minor car accident. So instead of getting her report number from the precinct, she decided to call me like, hey, can you look this up? Sure. I typed her name in the computer, got the report number, gave it to her, and that was it. Something so innocent like that. It was just like these things were blown out like,
Yeah. I mean,
So-
I can't even imagine.
Now, was I supposed to do that? Is it against NYPD policy? Yes, it is against NYPD, but the penalty for that is like a loss of a vacation day, tops, not federal crime, not federal jail.
Yeah.
That kind
Now,
of thing.
after that, though, you actually, after you're acquitted, do you try to file a lawsuit?
I did. I filed one with the federal court. It was the same judge who heard the case. I had battles after I was acquitted. I had my family court case and I had my lawsuit. The federal lawsuit wasn't going to be, everyone's saying, oh, you got to, make $1 million. Like that's not. It was going to be relatively a small amount of money.
Yeah.
But it was the same judge who made, the judge who acquitted me denied the lawsuit.
Right. All right. Yeah. Your lawsuit got denied, but did you feel a little worried filing that lawsuit? Did you feel like you're poking the bear a little bit? Did you ever think about that?
No, but on those terms, it was a judge who denied the lawsuit, and I had a lawyer. He said, we can appeal to the federal court. I said, you know what? This judge acquitted me. I don't want to disrespect him.
Right.
He felt basically to win the lawsuit, I had to show that my conduct didn't warrant any kind of investigation by any law enforcement agency, which I can't argue that, right? My wife turned this stuff over to the police. Like they had to investigate. I never said,
Right.
My whole thing, like I was always okay with being investigated. I was not okay with being arrested, and then certainly not okay with nonsense that was being told to the judge. All these facts that just weren't true. But the investigation was, as far as I'm concerned, as a police officer myself, like of course I should have been investigated if that sort of stuff is being turned over. So that was why the judge denied the motion. He said, no one can make an argument that he didn't bring this mess upon himself. And I respected that. I didn't want to go any further, just for my mental sanity. Just
kind of move on.
Bad just to be done with it. And
Right. Now, after your acquittal in July of 2014, for anybody watching, I do suggest you check out the documentary Thought Crimes: The Case of the Cannibal Cop, because after you are acquitted, this whole, you go home to your mom's house and she's very happy to have you there, and you guys they conveniently keep showing you cooking. I don't know why they do that in the documentary.
But I gotta say, I hated the documentary.
I thought it was good from a standpoint where you got to kind of see behind the scenes, kind of some of those really tense moments of you waiting to see if the state's going to appeal, all that kind of behind the scenes stuff I thought was good. But there was some stuff with the fascination of them keep, zooming in on you cooking meals. It was like all you were doing was cooking, and you can kind of see what they were trying to do there. So I could see that.
I had other opportunities. I had a choice between this documentary. I had a couple other news outlets I wanted to do like a feature about the case. And I could only sign on with one, right? Because non-disclosure, whatever like contract I had to sign. So I was promised by HBO, the lady who did the documentary, I was promised an accurate retelling of the case. She actually visited me in jail a few times.
Was that Dash, Amy Dash?
No, that was Erin Carr.
Oh, okay.
She visited me in jail a few times. She was portrayed herself to be very much in my corner, like, oh my, this case is so scary, not because of the material, but because someone was put away, found guilty, potentially facing life for a thought crime. And she's very much in my corner. She was talking to my lawyers, and my lawyers like, we don't recommend you do the documentary, but she seems to really be in our corner. So, we don't want you to do it, but if you're going to do it, like we think she's going to do okay. So, but long story short, I was promised an accurate retelling of the case, and it just was not close to accurate.
Right.
And then she's doing interviews after the documentary, and she said, I wanted half the audience to say that he was going to do it, half the audience to say no, he wasn't going to do it. If I was told that from the beginning, of course I wouldn't have done it, because it's open and shut that I was innocent. I didn't. So the documentary turned into cherry picking certain things in the government's favor, but not giving the whole picture. Like they made the trip to Maryland look very, very bad. They did, but they didn't paint the full picture. He went down. He goes to football games every year at his college. He sees this girl every time he goes down, he gets together with her. They never mentioned any of that. So I was very frustrated. My lawyers were very frustrated. I saw the documentary once. I never saw it again.
Yeah.
That being said, though, I do get a lot of messages even still today on social media, people who just saw the documentary, and a lot of people still were able to reach the right conclusion that there was no real crime committed here. So that provides some level of comfort, but I was really pissed off when I saw what that turned out to be.
I think some aspects, as I said, you get to see, I think the best thing to take away from that documentary is the relationship with your mother. That, if anything, that was like, and I watched it with my fiance, and I was like, man, this guy's mom is like the best. I mean, so I think that the relationship between you and your mom showing in that documentary is probably the best thing in that documentary, if it did anything. And like, as I said before, some of the really tense moments after the state's appeal, because they do appeal. Now, Gil, when's the last time that they appeal and they really try to come after you? When do they call it quits? After your conviction is tossed.
So they appealed the acquittal to the Court of Appeal, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals comes back 2-1. They decided the trial judge was correct. They could have then appealed to the Supreme Court, but at that point they said enough is enough, and they stopped. After the Second Circuit came back and ruled in my favor, and they also overturned the misdemeanor count also with the unauthorized searches. Mm-hmm. So they came back. I had fully, like, no criminal record, completely clean. At that point, they decided not to pursue it any further.
And there was no chance that you would ever be able to go back to the NYPD after something like that. They weren't going to have you. There was people, again, I talked to a lot of lawyers. People said, legally they if you really wanted to make a stink, they should take you back. But realistically, I mean, you saw how the case was. I'm going to have reporters following me around, like the Cannibal Cops going to 911 calls. Yeah.
It just could have been I couldn't put any, a future partner, future colleagues through that circus. I just decided I couldn't.
Yeah, before you know it, you open up your locker and then you see one of these hanging in there.
Oh, exactly. Oh, but the ball busting. Again, the ball busting I've always been good with. Like, I've always had a very good skin.
Yeah, no, to your credit, we spoke before the interview, and most of the interviews that are available of you, a lot of puns, a lot of ball busting, and you've always handled it pretty well. So it all ends. You don't go to jail for the rest of your life. These indictments, some of the horrible things here, you're conspiring to kidnap, to cannibalize, to do all sorts of things. You talk about having this house in the mountains where you're going to meet people. You talk about selling women. You talk about these big ovens, this basement full of ovens. You live in an apartment. You don't have a basement of your own. It's a laundry room or something like that. You don't have a place in the mountains. You don't have access to huge ovens.
And if I could add one thing, when the judge issued that very long and well thought out ruling, it was over 100 pages.
Yeah, I saw it was pretty long.
And he just completely destroyed the prosecutors. He destroyed their whole case. He pointed out the fact that my lawyers didn't even pick up on this, but he's like, based on the chat logs, there was like one weekend or one day or like a period of 24 hours where, if you combine all the chat logs, I was supposed to bring a girl to Pakistan, kidnap a girl in Ohio, and kidnap a girl in Manhattan, all on the same day within the same 24-hour period. So the judge pointed that out as, like, how could anyone possibly construe this as a real crime? Right. Now he said obviously the subject matter is very disturbing, and I have a diseased mind and all that stuff. But as far as the legal questions of the case, I mean, he really boom, just laid it out as to how this was not even close. For him to throw out the jury's verdict and acquit me, again, we said that never happens. It had to be such an open and shut case that I was innocent for him to pull that, for him to do that. And we never thought it was going to happen, but we were optimistic we were going to get a new trial. But Julia said, like, we made this motion, but it's not going to happen. Like, there's this, judges don't ever do that. And it happened. It happened out of nowhere.
Yeah. So you're acquitted, and basically life goes on. And we're in 2023 now, and we're talking, man, 12, 13 years have passed by, right?
Since the arrest, the case has been over now.
Yeah.
With the Court of Appeals over for maybe 8 years now.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, man. I mean, it's one of those things where if you remember it, the case, you really remember the case. It's kind of the cases, because I'm into crime, New York City history, and it's something that always stuck out of my head. But there is a lot of people that don't remember it. There is still people that kind of they don't know the case.
I mentioned earlier, I still get messages on Instagram, on Facebook from people who just learned about the case.
Yeah.
And, 9 out of 10 of them are positive, encouraging messages, which is that was always one of my concerns. Is okay, the judge acquitted me, I'm out of jail, but like, what the hell do I do now with the rest of my life? How am I going to be received back into society? And I guess one good thing about living in New York City is people move on to their next thing pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And the other thing that is a lot more people, quote unquote, get it. They get this whole case. A lot more people get it than don't. A lot more people understood what happened and the legal questions of the case, and really reached the right conclusion, despite all the crap out there, all the sensationalist nonsense, despite the documentary not being as accurate as I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
A lot more people got it than I thought. So on that end, it's been a positive. It's been better than I thought.
Yeah, I think we're at a point in society where some of the kink, some of the BDSM is kind of not as, I don't think it's as taboo as maybe it used to be. I don't think we're to the point of the cannibalism stuff as some of the stuff you were talking about, but I could definitely see more people reaching out to you and kind of maybe they're going down the same path. Maybe they have the same fantasies and maybe they ask you for advice. I don't know. Or maybe they just want to talk to you. And I want you to hang out for a minute. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was going to say it's just kind of a gamut of things people.
Yeah.
It's been interesting. It's been interesting.
Yeah.
I've been able to talk to and meet a lot of new people. I have a whole new circle of friends, basically. There's literally like hitting the reset button on my life. It's a whole new situation now, a whole new career I'm in. It's just everything new.
I was gonna say, I mean, you changed your life. I mean, you're talking to me now where it looks like an office. I'm very gracious that you decided to hang out where you are working to have this conversation. I want you to hang out after when we end this, Gil, just to talk to you for a minute. Is there anything you want to say in closing? And then I'm going to plug your books again. Is there anything you want to?
No, just the main point I wanted to hammer home, and I said it earlier, is like, it's one thing to think of me as an asshole, as someone who was a bad husband, and that I can accept. The people are probably right, but does being a bad husband, a bad person, warrant being sent to jail for the rest of your life? Those are two separate issues.
Yep.
That's just one thing people who are new to the case, I always just wanted them to think about the case through that lens. Right? Just because, oh my God, he's a disgusting pervert, a freak, like, just put him in jail. Like, no, you can't just do that in a free society.
Yeah. 100%, man. And that's what it came down to. It came down to not being able to prosecute somebody for thought crimes and things that they say. And some of the things you were saying really didn't even make sense, as we just discussed before. So Gilberto Valle, he is the subject of documentary, not too crazy about it, as you mentioned. Thought Crimes, the Case of the Cannibal Cop. He is the author of the book, Raw Deal, The Untold Story of NYPD's Cannibal Cop. The 2018 book, A Gathering of Evil. And you have a sequel to that book, The Social Catalog of Prey, 2019. And then you have another book that came out in 2019, The Lake Tahoe 10 Killings. So you're writing books now. And where can people find these usually? Like Amazon, stuff like that?
Amazon, you could Google, put my name into Amazon, Gil Valle, they'll all pop up. Those fictional books are not for everybody. It's for a very small niche market. What happened was the documentary pretty much forced me to write my side of the story. So I wrote the memoir, the autobiography. I teamed up with a ghostwriter who lives up in Maine, Brian Whitney. And we're actually pretty much very good friends. I'm actually going to see him this weekend. I'm going to travel up and hang out and get some drinks with him. So we became friends over the years, but that whole thing started. He was supposed to ghostwrite the book with my voice, but I ended up writing chapters. He's like, you know what? This is so good. Just you write the book and I'll clean it up as far as grammar and all that stuff. So
cool.
So I wrote that book and the experience is pretty good. So I was like, all right, I got to find something to do with my life. Let me see if I'll write a fiction book.
Yeah.
And me being the Cannibal Cop, it had to be something really revolting, really dark, really violent. So, and those books aren't for everybody. There's a Facebook group dedicated to splatterpunk, which is that genre, splatterpunk, extreme horror. And lately, they've sort of those books have seen a little bit of a revival with the last year or so. People who just noticed it are raving about it. Like, it's pretty funny. The people in that community love the book, like they really do, but it's not something that could ever sell me. It's just too dark and too.
Yeah. Well, listen, kudos to you, man. I mean, because someone like you have a full-time job, but you're trying to be creative. I mean, it's the same thing I do. I have a full-time job. I'm trying to do this YouTube. I'm trying to be creative, get out of the mundane life of going to work, going home, and kudos to you for doing that. And it's a good outlet, writing, of course. I mean, I hope you still continue to do so.
Yeah, it was. I stopped for a while in 2018 just because the effort I was putting into the books. Again, it's not a mainstream type of thing. So like the return for me wasn't worth the effort I was putting in. So, but I do have a fan club. People want me to continue writing, and the books sort of, like, as I mentioned, there's been a little bit of a revival. So I've been considering maybe getting into short stories or.
Well, let me ask you this: have you thought about YouTube?
No, I'm not too
It's not that hard.
savvy, which was another, kind of something I laughed at was the misdemeanor in the case, right? They basically, the law reads like that I hacked into a system and used it improperly, which for me I had to laugh at that because I'm so bad with computers to begin with.
Yeah.
To even comprehend hacking a system, it's just.
I'm going to be honest with you, man. The crime genre, the prison genre, these are genres that are blowing up on YouTube. There's a lot of successful channels. I could see you as somebody with a YouTube channel that talks to other prisoners, that talks to other people who have had experiences similar to yours. And I could honestly see you going somewhere with that. That's just advice. I mean, I'm not, this is a genre that is growing. And people want authenticity and people who have actually been in the shit and have been through things. And that's you, Gilberto Valle. You've been through a lot, man. And so maybe it's something to keep in the back of your mind. You know where to reach me if you ever needed tips or advice on YouTube world, I've been doing this almost 2 years. I'm not an expert, but I've been getting decent,
Yeah.
So, once again, Gil, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Just hang out for a minute, if you don't mind. I appreciate you doing this. I think we had a great conversation. Didn't think you'd ever say yes, but very glad you did.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's good to get my story out for those who might have missed it somehow. Somehow you missed it. Well,
yeah.
here's a story 10 years later.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, bud.
All right. Have a good night.
Too.